everyone you know is now predicting some kind of imminent apocalypse or shift or period of unrest or change, some kind of radical thing. So people are always talking about climate change and natural disasters. All of a sudden, people are talking about aliens way more than I remember. Some people think that politically, Donald Trump is setting himself up to be some kind of mega dictator, and that that's going to take place. He's going to do a third term, and he's going to lock down the cities. Other people think that the internet is about to be censored in a very oppressive way, and that suddenly we're not going to have free speech anymore. They think maybe they're going to come and take our guns. There's always this impending feeling that there's about to be a breakout of World War III, whether it's with Russia or China or Iran or Israel or now Venezuela. A lot of people on the internet are talking about there's going to be a flood, the sea level's going to rise, solar flares. And then you have AI. AI is probably the most interesting one, because what you have with AI is, on the one hand, you have the promise of AI revolutionizing everything. We're going to have humanoid robots to do all our jobs. So they're going to take our jobs, but we're going to get the money anyways. They're going to give us a universal basic income, and we're going to be able to do whatever we want. And some people think that's great, and some people think that that is actually a bad thing, because it's going to become like the Matrix. They're going to lock us in pods and use us as batteries, and it's all going to be a Borg hellscape. So you have like AI has this thing where it's like a vision of heaven on one hand and hell on the other. But the other thing with AI is that all of these promises that have been made about AI, like half of the economy now rests on the development of AI. Because in the US, for example, we have all of this debt and all of this spending that's totally out of control. There's no plan. There has never really been a plan to actually find a way out of it. So all of the investment, all of the optimism that remains in this economy is focused on AI. So the other thing you have to consider, besides the heaven and hell outcomes of AI that are being promised, is what if it just doesn't work out at all? And I think you have to say that if it really turns out to be a dead end, or a, what is that word? A bust, a dud. If AI turns out to be a dud, well, so much of the economy, so much of the troubled economy is now resting on AI, that's where all the optimism is. So if that drops out, that's a major bubble. And so what you're looking at is probably a significant collapse, a kind of depression, or however it would look exactly, some other version of catastrophe or apocalypse or change. And while it's interesting that all of these stories are very different, obviously the very interesting thing is that they're all the same. They're all different versions of the same thing being recognized by people with very different belief systems. But everyone, I think the reason that all these stories exist is that everyone kind of, even though none of these stories are exactly how it's going to go, they're not exactly true, they are all coming from a truth that we all feel, which is that we, as, I guess, as people of the world, but I'm thinking more American, we as Americans are in between two historical epochs. There is some kind of shift coming. Things are changing. That's very obvious. Things are not stable the way they have been for many decades. And so that generates a lot of uneasiness. And we can all kind of feel that. It's interesting to notice, first of all, that everyone is kind of telling a different version of the same story at its fundamental level, but also that everyone kind of has a similar reaction to this as well. And again, there's a lot of variation in the reaction, but ultimately it's kind of the same thing, because you have people who are worried about the shift, who are trying to make as much money as possible so they're ready when the time comes. Or maybe they're worried about the dollar, so they're converting everything to Bitcoin or assets or gold. Gold has become very popular all of a sudden. People are buying land, people are building bunkers, they're canning food. They are trying to store up treasures for themselves in order to be prepared for whatever's coming. And in a lot of ways, that's very smart. That's a good idea to be prepared. But there's one problem, which is that we don't actually know what's coming. Whatever the change is, whenever it really totally hits, it's going to have a lot of unexpected second order outcomes that are really beyond what we can predict right now. So the reality is you don't know what it is that you're preparing for exactly. So it's good to have a lot of money, it's good to have land, it's good to have food, maybe even it's good to have a bunker. But none of those things can actually save you. They're all just very small parts of the equation of being able to survive and thrive in whatever the new world is. And so what I want to tell you is something that I think is actually pretty obvious if you step back a little bit, but that most people are missing, which is that besides storing up treasures, the number one thing that you can do to prepare for a major historical social change is to invest in not assets, but in people, in community. Because for all of human history, you have been dependent on the people around you, the local, proximal, real world, material people around you. You depend on them for protection, for food, for everything. Because we are social creatures. Human beings we did not evolve, or we were not designed, whichever way you see it, to be just individual operators out on our own. We exist in hierarchies, we work together, and that's when we're at our best. In fact, we can't really even survive on our own for very long, for the most part. And so just in the way that you are totally dependent on other people for everything you have now, whether it's your food or your housing or the way that you make money, you survive on the back of this system of interconnected people and supply chains and everything. That's going to be true in the future as well, because humans are socially hierarchical creatures. And so once you remember that you are totally dependent on other people now, and you're going to be totally dependent on other people in the future, then you notice that whether it's Bitcoin or dollars or gold or cans of green beans, the stuff that you have is not going to save you. Maybe the green beans will for a little bit, but in order to survive and thrive in whatever the new world is, you're going to be, at least in some ways, it's going to be a return to normalcy. And the human condition is that we live in little societies together. We work together to get what we need. And so once you realize that the most important thing that you could be investing in now to be prepared for whatever the future is, whatever you think it's going to be, is to have some level of social integration with the people physically around you, your neighbors, your family, your community. And that seems strange to us because for the last few decades, the idea of a local community has gotten like passé. It's gotten outdated by the globalization and the internet and the supply chains. But you have to always keep in mind that all of this stuff that we have from, say, 1930 to 2025, let's just say the last 100 years, is a totally singular moment in history. If you look back at any other period of history, that stuff doesn't really exist in the same way. And so whether we have AI or not, whether there's aliens or war or natural disasters or dictatorships or not, what we have is we have the world around us and we have each other. And so I would humbly suggest that we take some of the things that we've learned from the internet, for example, the influencer model, because if you look at it historically, what online influencers are, it's kind of a replacement for like the priest or the shaman or something. You have people who communicate ideas in an effective way such that people come around them. They get a lot of views and likes and sponsorships. People come around them and generate a kind of community unto itself. And online, those communities are about whatever they happen to be about, whatever specific niche they inhabit. But that role of influencer, if you look at it in history as like a priest or a shaman, that is kind of the well, it's one of the center points of a community. And so if we can take what we learned from what has happened with technology in the last 30 years or so, and this idea of the influencer, and then turn that back towards the local, you will be filling a void that exists. And it's actually a massive void that everyone is overlooking, because a local newspaper, especially back when local newspapers were really important, like early 20th century, those are kind of what kept towns going. Those are what kept everyone on the same page. They really were integral to the idea of what the community was. It's like the centerpiece in terms of information. Every community, certainly across this country, every single community, the social fabric has been utterly disintegrated by the internet and by globalization. Our lives very much now revolve around, the stock market and supply chains and grocery stores and everything. And people don't even know their neighbors anymore. And so in order to put yourself in the best possible position for the future, you want to put the people around you in the best possible position for the future. And in order to do that, you need to begin to repair the social fabric. You need to take the entire world right now is basically this, the social fabric is so hollowed out that you could take any community that no longer has any identity, because they're all just on their phones and they become totally disconnected from the history and the culture of the town or city or village or whatever. You could take any community and begin to shape its identity. And that's a collaborative thing. It's not something that you're able to just do whatever you choose. But these people, and a lot of them are very difficult to work with for all kinds of different ways, men and women, young and old. They've lived in very different worlds. And so it's not the easiest thing in the world to get them to come together and see things in the same way. But they are starving for community identity, because humans are meant for that and we don't have it anymore. So I guess this is just a pro tip. If you're a serious person about like investing in the future, or people concerned about the apocalypse or whatever, if you're worried about surviving that, this is the number one thing you can do. Because any kind of currency or asset could suddenly equal zero tomorrow if conditions were to go one way or the other. But the connections that you have to your community, those are much more real, actually. So let me know what you think. I haven't really fully formed what it is I'm trying to get at here, because I can just see what's missing. But as far as how to make something new take its place, that depends on every person individually, every community individually. So let me know what you think.